This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
And so it's a wonderful example, Jen, of where an institution often comes across as a pest. So certain donors kind of doing this, that, and the other, and they're going, no, that doesn't interest me. And there's this misunderstanding. Well, then she doesn't care about us. It's this wonderful example when we found out what she cared about with the help of this researcher and said, might you be interested? This wonderful coalition was formed that was enthusiastic, that was joint, that this was this meeting of minds.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Jim Langley, president at Langley Innovations. Hello, Jim. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Hi, Jen.
Before we dive into fundraising perspectives that we're going to cover today, I'm wondering if you can share your origin story. I want to know, how did you get into fundraising? And then if you could share a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Sure, I'd be happy to. When I was in college, I thought I would be the next great novelist or the next great journalist. And I think many in college with me thought I would be too. I won awards, I was getting notice, and I was enjoying it, and people commenting on my writing style, et cetera. And I did a good bit of writing, including some freelance writing and journalism. And then as our first child came along, it occurred to me that I wasn't making enough money to support the child. And I was quite sensitive about that issue. I was reflecting on my own childhood and determined to do better for my child than my parents were able to do for me. So I started looking around for where I might find better paying work that would still allow me to write. And I found a job at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And basically, Jen, it was generating publicity. But about a year into the job, we had a new president. He was frustrated with the speech that he was getting ready to give and said, is there anybody here who can write? His assistant sent him to me. I had never met the president before. On very short notice, I wrote a speech for him on regional economic development. He quite liked it. And then I was his speechwriter after he got to know me and got to be appreciative of my writing style, which is, of course, a lot of research that goes into that for good writing. He said, you know, Jim, you ought to go over there and help the people in development. And my first reaction, I mean, I didn't say it. I said something more polite, but the back of my head was like hell, I'm going to do that. And I had an image of fundraisers, and in some cases it was based on people I actually had seen sort of bustling about, being very important. And I thought it was arm twisting. And he said, he could read my face, and he said, no, it's not that. People want to give, they want to make a difference, and good fundraisers simply figure out the most satisfying way of them giving and helping the institution at the same time. And he was right. And then once I got into it, I started to see the best side of human nature. And I found it incredibly rewarding to work with constructive, caring, generous people.
It is an amazing, amazing job. Wonderful people. As researchers, same thing. Like, we get to research how someone created their wealth and then how they want to give it away. It's pretty awesome. Now, what are you doing now as a fundraiser?
Well, so now I'm advising any number of clients, and most of my work and the most lucrative part of my work is in training. And the biggest part of my training is working with deans. And what I do with deans is try to help them construct what I'll call an impact investment case, usually focusing on a signature initiative, taking a strength within their discipline, their division, their school, and showing how greater investment in it would take that program from good to great or great to superb. And I do that, Jen, because that is the sort of sweet spot of big giving these days. It is sort of less about, blanket endorsements and less about broad institutional support and more about the targeting of resources to achieve some greater societal impact. So more and more people are not just giving to institutions, but trying to give through them to address workforce needs, to address societal ills, injustices. And so in working with deans, where so often money invested in higher education goes. We're teaching them how to explain what their divisional strengths are, what their disciplinary strengths are, and explain to philanthropists how significant investment can propel them forward, not just to make that school more distinguished, but to allow them to better serve some aspect or segment of society.
And there's a lot of writing involved in that.
Yes, there is. And I believe, I'm a great believer in writing, not just in putting words to paper, but as a discipline in organizing thought. So even people, we don't use writing as much in terms of putting writing in front of people as we once did, but we still use writing to frame thought, to order thought, to create logic, and to prepare ourselves when we meet with donors to have that ability in the topic sentence to address the issue at hand, to be mentally prepared then to have this order of events in the way we present material so that one thought flows naturally to the next. There are natural transitions. And so still a lot of work is done in writing and may be converted in other ways, but I'm a great believer that it is a incredibly valuable discipline and always will be.
It's interesting that we talk about writing, not what I expected, and a delightful way to go, because researchers tend to love writing.
Yes.
It's either writing or numbers or both. And I've seen the field move different ways over the years. And I recall the time when a researcher tended to be more librarian type and wanted to deliver an entire book as a profile, like just printed out everything.
Yes.
And it's often difficult to write less.
Yes.
Because then you really have to know what you want to say.
Yes.
And it is a great way of training the mind.
Yes.
To write well. In your years, there's no doubt in my mind you've had interactions with researchers. Can you tell a story about when a researcher saved the day for you?
I have thought about that in preparing for this conversation, and I can't quite say save the day, but I can cite many times where researchers brought additional insight, added dimensions to our knowledge of the prospect, including the largest gift that I was involved with, many of the largest gifts I was involved with, where it was that additional work sort of going beyond the obvious, trying to understand what made that donor tick, trying to understand their life story, what brought them to the point where they were, what made them philanthropic, what informed their philanthropy that proved to be so important. And I can think of a dramatic example where I also helped a client in a way that they were just about ready to write off a donor because they had tried this, that, and the other. And in working with their researcher, what we saw and started to create a kind of a theory as to who this person was, that she was very interested in at-risk teenagers because she had been one. We sort of started looking a little bit closer into this material, and we framed that theory. And what we realized is that everything they had tried before was in the name of institutional support. She had a single passion, like many donors, a kind of single issue based on life experience, sometimes very annealing, painful life experience. And so what we realized with the help of that researcher was this is the corridor. This is where she will meet them or she won't. And so when we came back with and said, do you have someone working with at-risk teenagers? And they did, we were so excited. They were a little bit skeptical, saying, oh, we've tried everything. Why do you think this will work? Because we said we've got the passion point. And sure enough, that person who they had tried for years to engage, when she heard about what they were doing with at-risk teenagers and when she was invited to meet with the dean and two faculty members, responded immediately, met them, spent 2 hours with them, then asked time to have coffee with them. And the first words out of her mouth were, I want to tell you what happened to me when I was 16, and unfolded the very story that we had intuited and blocked out by looking at various pieces of information. And so it's a wonderful example, Jen, of where an institution often comes across as a pest. So certain donors kind of doing this, that, and the other, and they're going, no, that doesn't interest me. And there's this misunderstanding. Well, then she doesn't care about us. It's this wonderful example when we found out what she cared about, with the help of this researcher and said, might you be interested? This wonderful coalition was formed that was enthusiastic, that was joint, that this was this meeting of minds. So that's the kind of example I would cite. It wasn't saving the day, but it was creating an opportunity, seeing an opportunity where many people, including several frontline fundraisers, had given up on that person.
That's an amazing story. I love it. And it really does involve a researcher responding to the purpose of the request.
Yes.
Where's the motivation? What's the story? Sometimes I look at some of the profiles that are just essentially CVs, and I'm like, there's no story there. This is about people and their stories. We need to write the story.
Exactly right. Where's the story? And I call it the backstory. What is it that made them who they are, that gave them this passion, this drive to do extraordinary things? What are they trying to do through philanthropy, then maybe to salve this wound, to make sure that others don't suffer, to turn whatever life gave them that was either very positive or very negative, and turn that into a philanthropic journey? If you get into that space, this is just a thrilling business to be into.
It is. And along that line, if you could develop the training curriculum for a new prospect research professional, what is something that you would include that often gets overlooked?
Since what we're talking about is so important, and let's call it psychological insight, it's not just, as you say, assembling a donor profile based on bits of information. It's really about building this biography of donor purpose. Since that is so important, I think the predicate, Jen, is working on self-knowledge. And there are these wonderful structured courses and approaches to understanding your own self-knowledge. And I can promise everyone listening, as somebody who continues to work on this, the more I develop my self-knowledge as to who I am, how I became who I am, why I respond positively and negatively to what I do, what motivates me, what turns me off, what inspires me. The more I understand that, the better I am at engaging in conversations with donors, which I'm doing on the behalf of many clients, often in the form of confidential interviews. And then I come back from those saying, I think I have found a way to link with this donor based on this discussion, that the more I work on self-knowledge, the more contributions I'm able to make to this field, and the more contributions I'm able to make to my clients and to my writing, whoever accesses that writing. So I think working on that first will then create this greater yield of being able to see story. As you said, many people in this field, and it's wonderful they do, not only like to write, but they're voracious readers. And they're often humanists. So many researchers will come from the humanities, the social sciences. So you see, they have this kind of general interest in humanity already. And I think with this work on self-awareness and self-insight, they then can bring that natural curiosity to bear as they start to glean bits of information about donors and start creating a theory. You see, what we want in approaching a donor is a theory of engagement. Where is the potential point of connection? So take that deeper insight into who we are, why we react to certain stimuli, start applying that to donors in a more consistent way, and start putting in the hands of frontline fundraisers. Here is the theory of alignment. Here's where we think this institutional strength will align with this donor's convictions, passion, or driving purpose. When we start approaching donors in the name of alignment with a credible theory, they find credible. They see us not extracting, but coming to them to partner to achieve something of shared purpose. Fundraising gets a lot more smooth. Donor relations get a lot better. People trust organizations. And so you think about all the challenges that we have today, I think will ultimately be stemmed by taking a more systematic approach to the theory of engagement with each donor. And I think research will be critical, and the deeper training of researchers will prepare them to make an even more significant contribution in the future.
When you talk about that self-knowledge, really that self-knowledge allows you to step outside of some of these emotional triggers and be present for the other person. And that helps us in everything.
I do a lot of this, and it's interesting. I'm being asked to do more and more of this in terms of training advancement staff. And it wasn't originally my idea, but people would say, do you have anything on this? And I said, oh, yes, because I've been going through the same thing. I've been working very diligently on this because it's been so rewarding and helpful to me and healing to me to gain this knowledge. And so they said, well, will you come in and facilitate these training sessions? So one that I liked has these sort of approximate personality types, in which you self-identify. So they sort of say, here are, common sort of personality types. Which one do you see yourself as? So it's completely voluntary. People look. It's so fascinating, Jen, because the type that I'll bet 95% of people in advancement will point to is the pleaser. The pleaser, right? So they come in, and then it gives the description of what makes you a pleaser, right? And of course, the downside of being a pleaser is this accommodation to the point of exhaustion. So they say to be fully self-realized, what does the pleaser need to learn? Boundaries, limitations, that it's okay not to please people 24 hours a day, that you can say, I think I've done enough. I need to back off. I need to rest. I need to repair, or I need to block out, anything that might be impositional or asking too much of me or pushing me beyond my limits. So it's so funny how many people in advancement identify with this. And then you talk about how to get there. But what's moving is, I've had people weeping in these seminars when they start to see themselves. And their first reaction is, well, this is what I've done to myself. I've accepted too much. I've not taken care of myself. I've not stood up for myself. I get this, but I go, no. You see, what happens is you are already now standing outside yourself and seeing how you became who you are. And it's not your fault. It's like if somebody gets hit by a car standing on a corner doing nothing wrong, it's not their fault. Why is it then when we suffer some form of trauma, which is almost inevitable in the way we grow up, at some point there's pain that is inflicted on our unique, sensitive, innocent self. And then we go into a protective mode. And the more difficult or sustained that is, the more we go into a protective mode. And pleasing is one of those protective modes that helps us get through the day or helps us through our early years, and then becomes this exhausting limiting factor. So when you get this recognition and you get people to say, it's not your fault, it's not something that you need to be ashamed of. Everybody gets hit by this emotional car or vehicle or, something that they are an innocent bystander in life. And that's how you have to see you're an innocent bystander. And these things happened that made you protect yourself. Oh, this is wonderful, Jen. And then when you do it in a group, you see that difficult person who I started to, was sort of seething about, all of a sudden I see their humanity. It's like, oh, the reason they're behaving that way is that's how they were raised. That's how they were treated. And that's why they're treating me, is that's all they know. When we start to see one another's humanity, we give each other, much more inclined to give each other the benefit of the doubt. Anybody in this field, because they're so inclined to pleasing, needs to do this. They can please within limits, but as I say, make sure that they re-nurture themselves along the way and don't give so much of themselves that they start to feel exhausted, hurt, resentful, isolated, not cared for, all those things that can bring us down and make the workplace even more difficult.
Well, and that brings us full circle to telling the story and finding out the prospective donor's story, because it's hard to see their story if you can't see yours. So they can look like, whatever you feel about high finance, you can say that that's probably not a good person. But when you start to really examine, where did they come from? What are their beliefs? Yeah, that can really change. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great to be with you. And thank you for what you're doing.
That was was Jim Langley, president at Langley Innovations. What a great perspective on how to become a better fundraiser and a better fundraising researcher. Shout out to Prospect Research Institute founding member Deborah Drucker for suggesting that I bring Jim on as a guest. Like Deborah, you can find Jim on LinkedIn and enjoy his informative and thought-provoking posts, or check him out at langleyinnovations.com.
Hey there! If you enjoyed this member interview, you have to come check out the Prospect Research Institute's learning community. It's a membership community with incredible people, great discussions, and comprehensive courses. Check it out at member.prospectresearchinstitute.org. I'd love to have you join me as a member. I'll see you there.